poor people will spend wastefully. There's no good evidence of this. Low and middle income countries have actually had enormous success in putting measures in place to deal with the pandemic. In terms of social assistance going to the poor, the biggest thing countries have done is increasing the amount of existing cash transfer schemes. So South Africa, Kenya, India, many others have topped up the amount of their pension and child grant. In some places, especially sort of very rural ones, there isn't as much infrastructure. There, the work we've done recommends either using local governments and NGOs or even using local community associations. This is for poor people who are in remote areas. They have no bank accounts. It's really hard to reach them. So often village committees like in Rwanda or Ethiopia can target the poorest people.
We are announcing this evening a massive social and economic support package.
South Africa just added in a new social grant for the unemployed. Peru and Brazil have also expanded the number of beneficiaries in their cash transfer scheme. That's harder to do immediately, but it can be done. There are a lot of ways developing countries can reach poor people. In emergency times, we have to realize that the targeting isn't going to be perfect. There will be some leakage and corruption, but it's definitely a worthwhile price to pay for getting money out. One criticism made is that poor people will spend wastefully. There's no good evidence of this. This is one of the most widely verified facts in microeconomics in the last 30 years. If you give poor people cash transfers, they spend them well. So people spend a lot of cash transfers on food anyway. The ODI did a 165 study review, finds that cash transfers improve dietary diversity, they increase food security. There's a review of studies by the World Bank which finds that cash grant recipients don't increase spending on alcohol or cigarettes. That spending can actually be from depression and stress linked to poverty. The cash grant removes some of that. And cash has the added benefit of giving people autonomy to spend on what they need most. There's this issue of extended dependency on the state. So in the long term, you stop people going out to earn. Again, there's actually not rigorous evidence of this from economic studies done across Africa and in the rest of the world. Cash transfers don't decrease whether people work. In some studies, they actually increase job search because they give money to people for transport costs and for airtime. They're not sufficient to get employment if the jobs simply aren't there for other reasons, but they do help. When people face shocks, they often sell productive assets, so cars, vehicles, land, to pay for food. That's really detrimental because it means when the recovery happens, they don't have the means to earn. And there's studies that show that cash transfers mean that they don't have to make those asset sales. And finally, and most importantly, they stop people from cutting back on food, and that's important for investment in children in the future. It's harder to find a smarter investment in a country's future. There's this question of the overburdened middle class. There's actually not a lot of evidence that small tax increases result in increased tax avoidance when that's been studied in the developed world. And at a time like this, I actually think the majority of middle class people would probably pay extra money back to the state for cash transfers. So if you look at the South Africa Solidarity Fund, they've raised £85 million in 2 weeks. 25 million of that was from donations from ordinary citizens. Nigeria raised 33 million for their Solidarity Fund in a week. So I actually think that if there's any time that the middle class would pay tax for social grants, it would be now. All of what I've said about cash transfers is dependent on the food supply being secured. In some cases, economists do recommend sticking to food parcels. That's not because poor people use cash badly, but it's because sometimes you can get extreme food insecurity if food supply stops working, or if food prices suddenly go through the roof and it's really difficult to get food. So I think it's important a lot of countries have infrastructure in place to watch food prices. That's a really, really important one because that may change some of how we do the response. Firms have used, for example, job retention schemes. So those have been in Brazil, South Africa, Morocco, Thailand. The idea is they provide subsidies for temporary reductions in the number of hours worked. They replace the earnings that are lost by the worker, but they stop the firm from destroying the job. The other things that countries have done have been things like mandatory severance pay, things like letting workers access their retirement accounts, or some of the most simple in Kenya and South Africa, just letting firms delay tax payments or giving them tax relief.